Today we're going to look at Tutorial 7, Designing a Web Form. The objectives of Tutorial 7 include exploring web forms, working with web form servers, create forms and field sets, create labels and input boxes. We're going to explore the form layout, work with date and time fields, create a selection list, create option buttons, create check boxes and text area boxes. We'll create spinners and range sliders. We'll use data list. We're also going to create form buttons, validate a form, and apply validation styles. So we look at an example here of the structure of a web form. Okay, so we have our field set. That's our field set legend. It's going to appear at the top left center of the field set by default. To the left, where we see name, street address, city, state, postal code, those are the labels that are going to be associated with our input controls. Now over here we have our input controls. For example, this one is an input control box, and it's got displaying placeholder text. Placeholder text is text that will appear in your form, but will go away as you start typing. So in this case, it just lets you know what's going on in that form. So in this control box, we have enter your name. So it prompts the user to enter their names. Some of these have default. You can have default text appear in this. So we're looking at web forms. Web forms that allow users to enter data that can be saved and processed. This is one of the most common ways to accept user input, and it allows us to have the creation of interactive websites for user feedback. So we can create these web forms using controls. These are also called widgets, and those are objects that allow the users to interact with the form. Now, each type of data entry control, it's going to be associated with some type of data field. The data fields are what's going to store the data values that are going to be supplied by the user. So we got some different types of controls that we have. We have input boxes. Those are used to insert text and numerical values. Option or radio buttons, they're used to select values from a predefined set of options. Selection list is used to select data values from an extensive list of options. Checkboxes, they're used to select data values limited to two possibilities, such as yes or no. The text area boxes, you can enter text strings that may include several lines of content. Spin boxes, these are used to enter integer values and confined to a specific range. The slider controls allow you to enter numeric values confined to a specific range. Color controls allow you to select the date and time values. Color pickers allow you to choose color values. So we see an example of this. This is a proposed survey form. And notice not coded in. Okay, so this is just something that they're hand drawn. It's a good idea to, when you're working with a web form, go ahead and sketch it out on paper. How do you want it to look? And then from there, it makes it coding it a lot easier. So we see the labels over here, input boxes. This one here is option boxes. They've got yes or no answers. The data visit, they put a calendar control here. This area here, the text area box, this is where they can put more information. So you have multiple lines of text here. The slider control lets them adjust the slider from 0 to 10. Notice the label, it tells them which is poor, which is great. The selection list box, when they click on this, it'll drop down a list. The spin box, they can use the up and down arrows to adjust to a numeric value. A check box allows you to click to select an option. All right, field values, they're not entered by a user. They're going to be processed by a program running on the user's computer or a web server in a secure location. So we see the example here. It says a web form is used to collect data from a customer for an order, and the server program processes the data and handles the billing and delivery. So we see here, this is the form that you fill out. And when they would hit submit my survey, that data is going to be sent to the server. The program on the server is going to process that, and then it will send the feedback back to the browser window. All right, when you're making a form, you're going to use the form element, the form tag. So we see here with the syntax of this. So we got the form, and we're going to give it an ID. In this case, it's just name text. The ID in this is going to be the name of our form. Attributes are going to specify how the form should be processed by the browser, and the content is the form's content. Now, a form element can be placed anywhere within the body of the page. They can also contain page elements such as tables, paragraphs, inline images, and headings. So we got a form element here. We're going to name this form survey. We have some action method and the and type attributes, because these have to be included on a form to specify where and how to send the form data. So we see we got the form, the action, and the URL, method type, and type is set to top. So we see the action attribute provides the location of the web server program that processes the form. The method is going to specify how the browser should send the form data to the server. And finally, the ink type is attribute specifies how the form data should be encoded as it is sent to the server. Now, for this method attribute, that once again is going to specify how the browser should send the form data to the server. We got two possible values for this. We got the get method. Let's go tell the browser to append the form data to the end of the URL specified in the action attribute. This is going to be the default method. The post method is going to send the form data in its own separate data stream, and it's considered more secure form of data transfer. The ink type attribute has three possible values, and we see the values here in the description of these. Where it can be encoded as a long string, text string. Form is used when uploading files which no encoding or the data values occur. And then we can also send it as plain text. All right, so we see the code for their form ID survey. We're sending the action. We're sending this to example.com. The method we're using is post. With forms, you're going to just use a lot of JavaScript when you're working with forms, and when you get into the next course, you will see this as well. JavaScript, it's a script element, is an HTML element used to access and run JavaScript programs that run within the user's browser. So we're going to have the script element, and it's going to run this JavaScript file. This is an external JavaScript file. Really similar to the CSS, the CSS, external CSS. You can also have an external JavaScript file as well. All right, field sets are groups of fields that share a common purpose. Field sets are created using the field set element. So we see here the syntax field set ID is set to ID. Our content, once again, we'll close it. The ID in this is going to identify the field set, and content is the form content within this. So inside of our form tag, we're going to put two field sets. We got our customer info, and then we got our experience info. To create a legend for the field set, we're going to use the legend element, where we just put the legend tags, and the text within the legend tags is going to be the text that's going to be part of the legend. This is only going to contain only text and no nested elements. And like I said before, by default, the legend is going to be placed on the top left corner of the field set box. Now, it can be moved using different locations using the CSS positioning styles. So we see here we've got a legend, customer information in the first field set, and then we've got share your experience at Red Ball Pizza as the legend for the second. Now, to create an input box, we see the syntax for input element. We use the input, and we set name. That's going to be the name. This attribute is going to provide the name of the data field associated with the control. ID is going to identify the control in which the user enters the field value. And the type attribute indicates the data type of the field. So we got a bunch of different types we can use. We can use buttons, check boxes, color, email, password, numbers, reset. So be sure to go through all of these type values and what the controls displayed by the browser does. All right, so in this one, for example, we're setting up the input. The name of this is going to be customer name. The ID is going to be name, and our type is text. Now, all of these that's got the top text are going to be input boxes for general text entries. You see on the next one, we're asking for the customer phone. We're setting the ID at the phone, and then the top is the tel. All right, so that's saying that it has to be in a telephone format. Same with the bottom here, we're setting up the type as email. So it's an input box for email addresses. Virtual keyboards are software representations of physical devices. You can make your web forms where they can be responsive by displaying different virtual keyboards for each input type. So, for example, an input box for telephone numbers might be more convenient to read with digits displayed prominently on the keyboard rather than letters. If you want to associate a text string with a control, the text string has to be enclosed within the label element. So we see we have the opening label, and we're saying for the ID, that's the name of the control, the ID of the control is associated with this label. We put our label text, and then we close the tag. For example, we have our label element. We're going to say the for name, which is going to link to this name here, this input field, and we're going to put the word name there. So if we were writing this code, we would see that located here. Name, and then the input field that's got the ID of name. Now, you've got two general layouts for designing a form. You can have your labels where they're placed directly above the input controls, or labels and controls are placed side by side as you see in the two-column layout here. You can put a default value by putting the value attribute and then the text here. So for example, the value attribute here is the abbreviation for the state of Florida. You can use the placeholders. That's text strings that appear within a form control. Provides a hint about what kind of data should be entered in that field. They're defined using the placeholder attribute. So in this case, we would put placeholder, and then where the text is, it'll be whatever the text of that placeholder is. So we see with example here, we have a placeholder, and we tell them the first and last name. Placeholder, and then the information for the zip. So after we write our code, we see we have our form. We got our field legend, field set legend. We got our default values placed. We have our placeholder text placed in these information boxes here. Now the date and time fields ensure that users enter the date in a correct format. You can indicate using type attributes of date, time, date time dash local, month, or week. So we see here we got the input name, visit date, the ID is visit, which is going to put the label, allow the label to be associated with the input form, and then the type is going to be set to date. The selection list, that puts a box that puts the user with a group of possible values for the data field. The list is going to be created using the select and option element. So we see the example, we have the select name set to name, and then we have our option values. We have value 1, text 1, value 2, text 2. We're looking at these. The name is going to be the name of the data field. Where we have value 1, value 2, that's possible field values. And text 1, text 2, that's the text of the entries in the selection list the user will see on the web form. So we see here that when they come into the selection list. So we got our name of order type. You got the ID of order. Once again, it's going to be able to link the label and associate it with this field. So they're going to see option 1, they'll see carryout. For option value 2, order 2, they'll see delivery. So when they click on that drop-down menu, those are the options that they will have. All right, so by default, it's going to be a drop-down menu. Now you can set this where it's as a scroll box. I use the size attribute and to the select elements. So we see the select size is set to value. Value at this point is going to be the number of options that the user or the selection list will display at one time. So looking back here, we have 4 options. If we have that set to the size value to 2, when it starts, they'll see carry out delivery. And then as they scroll down, they'll see dine in and take and bake. Now, by default, selection lists are only going to allow one selection from the list options. If you want to add more than one item, you add the multiple attributes. We see in the syntax here. Now, you got 2 ways users can select multiple items from a selection list. If the items are not together in the list, if they're not contiguous, you would hold down the control key while making the selection. If they are, if you need to select a range of items, you select the first item, you press and hold the shift key, and then select the last item in the range. That will select the first, last, and everything in between. With the first option here, this will only select the items that you click on. You can also organize selection list options by placing them in option groups using the opt grouped element. So we see the syntax of this. We got the opt group label 1. Now that's going to be the label for the different groups of options. So we see the example here. We have appetizers, and then here we got the spicy mozzarella sticks, pepperoni rolls, toasted ravioli. We have the salads for the second option group, and we see the output of this here. You can also create option buttons. Now, these are also called radio buttons. Now, not like the selection list appeared, but the options are going to appear as separate controls in the web form. They're going to be created with a group of input elements with a type attribute of radio. So we see the syntax of this here. We have the rest of this, the value 2. Okay, so in these, name is the name of the data field, and values 1, 2, and value 3 are the field values associated with each option. Now you can also use the checked attribute to go ahead and pre-select one. You can have one selected by default. So we'll see an example of radio buttons. So this is asking, was your service friendly? So in this, we have the options for yes or no. For the next one, that says, was your order correct? Once again, they're asking yes or no. And then, was your food hot? Once again, we had input values for yes or no. Now notice with these, we have our field set up to an option group. We have our label for CS, and it's set to yes. Our input name, the ID of this is CS, so it's associating that yes with this value. And we set the value to radio, the top to radio. Same thing with each one of these. Okay, so when we want to use a label, the ID for the input and the ID or for field for the label have to match. Checkboxes are designed for fields that record the presence or absence of an object or event. Use the input element with the type attribute set to checkbox. So we see the syntax. We've got input name. The value is the value attribute. That contains the value of the field when the checkbox is checked. And the type attribute indicates the input box is a checkbox. So we see our input name, mail me, ID set to mail me, value, yes. So that's the value is going to happen if the checkbox is checked. And then finally, we're going to display the checkbox control. Our label for this is add me to the mail list for great coupons and specials. So what the user will see is they will see this label with a checkbox beside it. Text area box, use text area element. And then the text is the default value of the text field. You can also use the rows and columns attributes to set the text area size. Row is going to set the attributes for the number of lines in the text column, while the calls attribute is going to set the number of characters per line. So here we got a text area. The name is set to customer experience or custom X experience. The ID is a com box. Once again, so it's going to associate with the label. And this is the output. So we get the label. Tell us more about your experience. And then here the text box area. Spinner controls display an up or down arrow to increase or decrease the field value by set amount. To create one of these spinner controls, you need to apply the input element using the number data type. So in here we have the input name, dine out, ID is die spin, and our type is set to number. So it's going to display the spinner control. Now in here we have our default value, field value for this. We got the step here. Let's just say how much it goes up or down based on each click of the spinner. Next to this is the minimum and max. That's the minimum and maximum values of the field. So this is where we can restrict the number of times people can answer this, as far as when they say how many times you dine out a month. We can say that we only want the range between 0 to 20. All right, a slider control limits a numeric field to a range of possible values. And to use this, you apply the range data type to the input element. So once again, we're going to have in here we've got the text strings that will appear before and after the range slider, and then this is the actual slider we're creating. So we're setting the top of this to range. We're starting the value. That's our default starting. This is 5. It's going to step by 1 each time they click or slide this. And then we have our minimum and maximum numbers here as well. All right, data list is a list of possible data values that a form field can have. They use the data list element. So we see the data list. The ID is the name of the element of the data list. We have our option values, and then the values are set this. So we see here the data list here is, this case is dish type. So we're asking them, what is their favorite dish? Well, the values we're giving him is the, whatever that is, pizza, the Kahuna pizza, barbecue chicken pizza, and so forth. So those are the options that they have. And then we close up the data list. Now, notice here the ID is the dish type. We're linking this here with the list here. All right, form buttons are a type of form control that performs an action. Some of the actions performed in this can be run a command from the program linked to the web form, submit the form to the program running on the web server, or we can use a reset. So we reset the form fields back to their default values. Command button is going to run a program. It's going to affect the content of the page or the actions of the browsers. These are created by using the input element with the type attribute set to button. So what we're doing here is we've got our input. The value is set to text, so that's going to be the text that appears on the button. On click, that's what happens when we click. So when we click this, it's going to run the program. So the script that's listed here is actually the name of the program it's going to run when the button on the user's is clicked on by the user. Submit button submits a form to the server while processing for processing when it's clicked. Submit buttons are created using input elements with the type set to submit or reset respectively. So if you want to reset it, you would set the top here to reset. Once again, this text here, it's going to be the text string that appears on the button. All right, so reset button is going to reset a form. It changes all the field values back to their default values, deletes any field values that the user has entered. We create these the same way as we did the submit, except we change the top to reset. So we see the example here of the code. So our input, our types are set to submit for the first or reset for the second. Now the values here is submit my survey or cancel. That's going to be what shows up on the actual button. So if we were looking at this page on our buttons, we'd have one button that says submit my survey and one button that says cancel. Cancel will reset the form. You can also design a custom button. So you have the button, using the button element, set the top to text, and then content. Text attribute, or the top attribute on this is going to specify the button type, while the content, that's going to be the HTML element placed within the button. We've got two types of validation. When you need to make sure that you validate your web forms, validating a form that ensures that the user has supplied valid data. You got two types of validations. You have server-side validation and you have client-side validation. Server-side validation occurs on the web server. So that's after the user clicks submit, the information is sent to a web server. There it's checked, validated, and if it's not correct, it's going to be sent back to the user and tell them that the form is not valid. Client-side validation, this occurs in the user browser. Client-side validation, that's going to run when the user clicks submit. Now, before any of the information is sent, it's going to check the forms. A couple of other things you can do with client-side validation. You can actually have it set to when the user moves off of a field to another part of the form, it checks that previous field. So for example, if I was required to put my first, my last name, and then my phone number and email address. If I type in my first name, I click on the second, my last name, the second form, I don't fill out that information. I'd go down to my email address. With client-side validation, that form can already be checked and tell me, hey, you have to fill out this before you submit. So you need to make sure that you have required values. So when you're validating, the first validation test is verify the data is supplied for all the required data fields. You add the required attribute to the control to identify required data fields. So in this case, if a required data field is left blank, the browser will not submit the form. It's going to return an error, and it's going to let the user know that the data is not available, that something has been missed. You can also validate data based on data type. So if you have a data field with a number type, it's going to be rejected if you enter letters in it. Fields with email or URL types will be rejected if the user doesn't provide if the user provides an invalid email address or text that doesn't match the format of a URL. You can also test for a valid pattern. So you can test whether a field value follows a valid pattern of characters, test the character string against a regular expression. Regular expressions is a concise description of character patterns. And if you're going to validate text value against a regular expression, you'll add the pattern attribute to the input element. So we see an example here. So the value of the customer zip field against a regular expression pattern. We see the syntax for this. So we look at the pattern for this. Now, this information here is going to represent any string of 5 numeric values. You can also set the max length attribute, where you set the value in this is the maximum number of characters in the field value. So the example here, we've got the input name, and the name of the field is the customer zip, and the max length is 5. Now, this is not going to distinguish between characters and digits. Okay, but this will not allow them to put 6 letters or 6 numbers either into that field. You can also apply inline validation. Okay, this is what I was talking about, where it's you have immediate data validation or reporting of errors. You use the focus pseudo class. That's used to change the display style of fields that currently contain invalid data. The focus is the state in which the element has been clicked on by the user, making it the active control of the form. So when you click in that field has a focus. So when you go off of focus for this, it will look and say, okay, you may not have had the information filled out correctly. You need to put the information in this. You have other pseudo classes for form controls and fields listed here as well. So we're looking at the example here to create styles for all checked options. In the form, we apply the check pseudo class. So we got our input, our type is set to radio, and we set the pseudo class to checked. And then the style series, that's the CSS styles applied to the checked option buttons. The valid and invalid pseudo classes are used to format controls based on whether their field values pass or fail a validation test. So in this case, we've got the display elements. Input elements containing valid data with a light green background. You're going to use the following styles. So we have our input set to valid, and then we're going to change the background of this. In this case, it's going to be a light green background. So let's let them know that this was filled out correct, because it is input, is set to valid. It will change once the data is validated. Now, on the other hand, if we want to change the fields for invalid data to a light red background with focus, we've set the input to focus and we set it to invalid. So now if it doesn't meet what is required for that, it's going to change the background color, in this case to red. So we see in here we've got our styles for our valid data, and this all checks. It's going to display a green check mark, and if it doesn't, it's going to put a red X. Okay, so we have the invalid information here. You will be doing a lot more with validation once you get into 1520 with JavaScript, and once you move into web development too.